Hello everyone, and welcome to After Alexander. Episode 70. Quite the Predicament. We're in a strange phase of our narrative now, where Volume 1 of Granger's Seleucid trilogy is no longer used as a source, but Bevan's first volume is still with us. Today, let's see what happens when Antiochus becomes king. When Seleucus III died, the army was left basically leaderless. A general called Epigenes managed to lead the Seleucid forces safely out of hostile territory and back across the Taurus Mountains. At this point, Bevan says it seemed uncertain who was going to take power next. On the one hand, we have Antiochus. This is the 18-year-old son of Seleucus II and the younger brother of Seleucus III. He was residing in Babylon at this point and was far away from the Western action. This reminds me a bit of Antiochus I being far away from Macedon back in the 280s BCE. On the other hand, we have Achaeus. This is the son of Andromachus and the great-grandson of Seleucus I. Once Seleucus III died, he took action, being the one to kill Nicanor and Apatorius. He was also well-liked, capable, and powerful, and there were those pushing for him to take the crown. However, Achaeus stayed loyal to Antiochus. He declared Antiochus the new king and resumed campaigning in Anatolia to take back Seleucid territory. From this point on, we can truly say that we have entered the reign of Antiochus III. The new king Antiochus III headed westwards. He delegated Anatolia to Achaeus. However, he also gave sweeping power beyond the Tigris to the governor of Media. This was a man by the name of Molon. Molon shared this power with his brother Alexander, who was the governor of Persis. Bevan is keen to point out that Antiochus III is not the one pulling the strings at this point. The real power behind the throne is Hermias, who is called a prime minister by Bevan, and who we first introduced a few episodes ago. Hermias was ambitious, hostile to anyone he deemed to be in competition with him, and violent. This situation threatened anyone powerful enough to be a rival to him within the Seleucid Empire, with Epigenes being a target of Hermias' hostility. We'll come back to this rivalry in just a moment. The overall situation is far from good. People thought that Achaeus would take back his loyalty to the throne and look out for himself instead. Meanwhile, Molon and Alexander wanted to nail down their own power. Accordingly, in 221 BCE, they rebelled against the throne, although I have also seen it written that Hermias was a factor in this rebellion. The two men had examples to turn to when it came to independence in the Eastern Empire. These examples are Arsaces I and Diodotus II, who we saw successfully withstand Seleucus II coming east in earlier episodes. Molon placed the diadem on his own head and made himself a king. This again feels very similar to Antigonus I declaring himself king in the dying days of the Macedonian Empire. Molon tried to sway the Greeks and indigenous people in Iran away from the Seleucids. The situation in the east is not looking good. That said, the Seleucids were still popular in Anatolia, and the hope was that Achaeus could be kept loyal over in the west. It was clear that the best course of action that could be taken now was to prevent getting mixed up in other affairs, keep Achaeus on side in the west, and try to win back the hearts and minds of the Easterners. However, the throne is in a far from ideal place right now. There was a young king in charge with a corrupt power behind the throne. There was a meeting to decide what should be done about the eastern situation. Epigenes advised that the Seleucids should march east with the king personally present. This latter point was because it would win over the eastern people. We've seen this strategy work before when Antiochus III was placed in Babylon by his father. However, this wasn't how Hermias saw it. He exploded against his opponent, accusing him of wanting to turn the king over to the rebels and basically claiming the idea was a trap. The rest of the individuals present at this council were intimidated into agreeing with Hermias. Therefore, Antiochus III did not go east, although a force under two generals called Theodotus and Xenon did. Hermias was left feeling worried that Antiochus might want to travel east for the campaign. So he turned to everyone's favourite distraction, Egypt. Around about now, Ptolemy III died and was succeeded by Ptolemy IV. My popular sources have given Ptolemy IV birth dates of either 244 or 238 BCE. I started going down a rabbit hole of sources and references for how exactly they arrived at these dates, but realised it was too complicated and did not really matter for the purposes of our Seleucid story. Either way, he became king after the death of his father in the end of 222 or in about February of 221. I'll be going with 221 BCE here, as this is the date I've seen most often, and it's the one the Oxford Classical Dictionary uses. Ptolemy IV would therefore have been about 17 or 23 when he came to power, depending which birth date you believe. Let's talk for a minute about the Egyptian royal family at this time, as its information we'll need in future episodes. As we've discussed before, Ptolemy III had married Berenike II, the daughter of King Magas of Cyrenaica. We know the names of some of their children: Ptolemy, Magas, Alexander, Berenike, and Arsinoe. Berenike Jr. died in February of 238, well before her brother became the king. Magas has been listed as probably being the youngest son. There appears to have been another son, as indicated by an inscription, so let's go over what a 2002 paper says about the sons of Ptolemy III. The first of them was the future Ptolemy IV. There was then a son without a known name, then Alexander, and then Magas. This second son has had the name Lysimachus suggested based on the length of his name in an inscription. So, for our purposes, the sons are Ptolemy IV, Lysimachus, Alexander, and Magas. As we said, daughters Berenike and Arsinoe are also mentioned. Ptolemy III's Wikipedia lists the birth order like this. Arsinoe is born first in 246 or 245 BCE, with Ptolemy IV following in May or June of 244. This is the version of events that makes him 23 upon becoming king. The next child born is the child maybe called Lysimachus in either July or August of 243 BCE. Alexander then follows in September or October of 242, Magas in November or December of 241, and finally Berenike in January or February of 239. What I find interesting is that we get birth months for some of the children, which allows us to calculate the intervals between their births. If we use the earlier month in all cases, there are 14 months between Ptolemy and Lysimachus, 14 again between Lysimachus and Alexander, 14 again between Alexander and Magas, and 14 between Magas and his little sister Berenike. Pregnancy in humans lasts about 9 months or 40 weeks. If we subtract this, we get about 5 months between pregnancies. Quite the dynastically productive marriage. The point for our purposes today is, Ptolemy IV is the new king of Egypt. Hermias painted a vivid picture for his king of how threatened the Seleucid Empire was, telling of a realm threatened on all sides. After all, he whispered in the king's ear, Achaeus was now basically ruler of Anatolia after being wildly successful against Attalus I. It's easy to imagine Antiochus swallowing nervously, wondering if a Hyrax 2.0 was about to appear. Added to this, there was a coalition favouring Egypt and the East was in full revolt. Hermias now added fuel to the fire by forging a letter from Ptolemy IV to Achaeus, urging Achaeus to declare himself a king. It's not hard to see how that might not have gone down that well. Around this time, Antiochus III got married, and you can apparently see an attempt to cling on to Anatolia in this wedding. Who knows, maybe Hermias' speech had an impact. Either way, he married Laodike III, the daughter of Mithridates II, who we last met in a significant way at Ancyra. She was the first cousin of the king via her mother. And yes, I know, yet another Laodike. At least we've got regnal numbers to keep things straight in our heads. A fleet commander called Diognetus brought her from Cappadocia, and she was married to Antiochus at Seleucia on the Euphrates. This is where the royal court was based at the time. Once the wedding was finished, they moved on to Antioch. Planning began for a push against Egypt, on the advice of the dominant Hermias. Next time, we'll advance the story further and, among other things, see how the Eastern expedition of Theodotus and Xenon pans out. In the meantime, thank you all for listening. Feel free to get in touch at the show's email address for any questions or comments. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.